Thanks very much for being here. We're about to review and learn the commentators on chapter 13 of Shmuel about 2 Samuel. To review without really deeply reviewing, because we've done that already. Amnon is one of David's many sons, and he rapes Tamar, David's one daughter that we know about. Tamar has one particular brother. Everyone else is related, although she's sort of not a biological sister because only one brother has the same mother, and none of them has the same father, because all the boys are the sons of David. David's the father of all the boys, and she's regarded as having no father. And we've gone through that. So Amnon rapes her, and he could have married her legally. It would be weird, but he could have, because he wasn't a full brother, did not have the same mother or father, could have married her. Instead, he rapes her, and her one real brother, Absalom, he's a brother because they have the same mother, though they also do not have the same father, decides he's going to take revenge. She's broken. She actually, in retrospect, says, if he was going to rape me, I wish he would have kept me and married me. Because that can be. And we talked about all of that last week also. And it's posted on YouTube if you'd like to review it. But she'd rather remain with him married, Amnon the rapist, than to be just left out there as having been raped. And now what's going to become of her for the rest of her life? That social society different from nowadays. She might be almost non-marriageable to people looking for a virgin and all kinds of stuff. We get a little insight for all the contempt we have for the Arab terrorists and the shtick about if they kill Jews, they get 72 virgins. It gives a little bit of an insight into ancient times, Middle Eastern culture, the primacy of a virgin. And as much as we have contempt for the Arab terrorists and all that garbage, you see how they put a primacy, and Jews did also. It was a big thing to be marrying a virgin. It meant she was moral and all kinds of things we talked about. So Avshalom lies cold, keeps himself under control for 2 years until everyone assumes that horrible parsha, that horrible moment in our lives is past. And now Avshalom is having a big festival. He's a shepherd. We talked about that. And this is the time of the sheep shearing. And he's had a successful season. He's going to have a big celebration. And he invites everybody from the family. He knows that David, his father, is not going to come because David's going to be accompanied by a whole big gigantic retinue. Everything that happens whenever the king goes anywhere, not only bodyguards, Secret Service, but all of his cabinet members and all of his followers, entourage. So he knows David's going to turn it down and won't be there. And Avshalom invites all the brothers. And his intention is, and he carries it out during the party, to kill Amnon for having raped his sister 2 years ago. All the other brothers get out of there fast. They don't know what's going on. All they know is a lot of blood. Avshalom just murdered one of them. They don't have time to really evaluate. Maybe he's only aiming for them and not for the others. So they all run away. Word reaches David. And David has to figure out what to do, and he chooses pretty much not to say anything. I mean, what's he going to do? He can expel Avshalom from his life. He does not do so. It's the second time he's been challenged in this way. When the word came to him 2 years earlier that his son Amnon had raped his daughter Tamar, he also said nothing. The text tells us he was shattered by it. He was furious and heartbroken, but he said nothing. And Avshalom held an anger towards the father, David, for having said nothing, for not having done something. And this is something Avshalom continues to harbor. So number one, Avshalom decides, Dad's not going to do anything. I'll take the law into my own hands. And number two, this is not going to resolve Avshalom's contempt and anger towards his father, which we're going to see that's going to play out even worse towards his father. So that's what's going on. And we read the whole story. And now we're going into the commentary. By the way, one more word. They have on TV, I'm pretty sure it's Netflix, or is it Amazon? They've got this thing, House of David. It's Amazon, I think. And it's sort of a depiction, is a serial, multiple episodes of the life of David. And I took a quick glance. It's episode 1. And they've got more than that up. I don't know if they've got the whole thing up. They've got at least 2 or 3 episodes up. And it's very interesting for me. I've been so immersed in teaching the subject to you that I was not able to enjoy it because there were so many factual mistakes. The people who put this thing together took so many liberties with accuracy that I couldn't watch. I had to stop in the middle of the first episode. I just can't watch this. And then I read 2 or 3 reviews by people I respect, not rabbis. Most of them don't have televisions, but by people I respect. And everybody loved it because it seems that everybody loved the thematic, the big picture, that it gets into the life of David and his mindset and what animated him, and it makes him look like a really good guy, which he is. And the reviews that I read, the 2 or 3 reviews, nobody picked up on all the fine points of accuracy that they got wrong. As with so many movies, whenever it says at the beginning of a movie, based on a true story, that means it's all lies. In order to make the true story better, right? The Cecil B. DeMille, Exodus, the 10 Commandments, to give Moshe Rabbeinu a girlfriend. I mean, it's just nonsense. They mix up the timing. They throw the Korach rebellion into the golden calf. But if you don't know from nothing, it does give a flavor of what that story's about. Same here. So do I recommend it? I don't know. I think I'll watch another episode. I decided to start episode 2. And again, if you're looking at it for accuracy, forget about it. It's just not accurate. But if you're trying to get a feeling, if you're in our class, you don't need it. But if for a person that doesn't know nothing from nothing, which is like the definition of American Jewry, I guess it's worth something. Just a commenting on, because we're learning it. So let's get learning in the text itself. We again invite you to subscribe. I'm sure anybody who catches us on YouTube, please subscribe. We're crawling up. We're about 780 subscribers, trying to get to 1,000. Coming up with some ideas on how to do it elsewhere. But subscribe, give us a like, send a clip to other people, and here we go. Okay, let's go. So we're going to focus today on the Meforshim, the commentators. We'll start with Exodus 21. To again remind ourselves, the concept, this is from Shmos, Parshat Mishpatim, Perek Chavav. We learned this about 3 weeks ago to refresh our memories. A Hebrew slave, a Hebrew servant, technically a slave, an Eved Ivri. In biblical times, there was servitude, primarily under 2 circumstances primarily. Number 1, if you stole from someone, got caught, got sentenced to repay, and could not afford to repay, and typically you had to repay double. That was typically the statutory punishment for stealing. You had to pay double what you stole. So if you could not afford that, you had to go into servitude and be a servant living under the roof of the person from whom you stole. And you had to work your hours off. Whatever an hourly, let's say an hourly would be $20 an hour. I don't know. So if you work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, 70 hours a week, at 20 an hour, 700, it's 1,400. So you'd be working off at 10 hours a day for a whole week. You'd be, under those numbers, you'd be working off $1,400. Of course, they're using shekels and stuff, of what you owe as your punishment. If you owe 7,000, let's say you stole $3,500 and you have to repay, therefore, $7,000, you'd have to be a servant for, let's say, 5 weeks. But the Torah said, under no circumstances would you have to be a servant more than 6 years. In the 7th year, you go free. Now, if you're not married, or if you're married, it's treated one of two ways. If you're married, you go into servitude and you bring your wife and kids with you. If you're not married, you go into servitude, and the master is allowed to couple you with a female slave he has, a handmaiden. And we've talked about it in the past, so we're not going to get deep into it now, but sexual relation laws were different in biblical times. Things that were allowed were different. We've learned about pilagshim, concubines, people who do not get married, and yet the man may be sexually active with her. And we've learned about that. We've learned about the difference between a concubine and a wife. The concubine has no rights. We've learned even our fathers, like Yaakov Avinu, had children with Bilhah and Zilpah, who were they wives, were they initially handmaidens, but Bilhah gave him Dan and Naphtali, and Zilpah gave him Gad and Asher. Avraham Avinu had Hagar, and so on and so forth. So there were concubines, and there's a story of Yehuda and Tamar, a different Tamar in the Torah. And so in the same way, halachically, a God-fearing master could take his God-fearing slave, if the man's single, and put him with a God-fearing woman, and they would have babies. And the halacha was that the woman and the babies, as they grew up, remained the property of the master. And when the man, at the end of his time of servitude, after he's paid it off, or his 6 years are up, he doesn't have to work more than 6 years, even if he owes more than that. He goes, and the children stay behind with the mother. And that's a source for the idea that when a man has babies, let's say with a non-Jewish woman, or with that shifcha, that servant, those babies are not his children. He's not the father. He impregnated the woman, she's the mother, but he's not the father. In bakapo yavo, bagapo yesei. If he comes in single, he leaves single. And the kids stay behind, because they're not his kids. In ba'al ishahu, v'yotza ishto imo. If he comes in with his wife, then his wife comes with him. She doesn't end up with the master. So if his master gave him a wife and she has borne him children, the wife and her children belong to the master, v'hu yetzeh b'kapo. And then finally, not necessary to review, but it just wraps up that little part of the Torah, that if a guy says, but I love the wife, I love the kids, even if technically they're not mine, I mean, I'm emotionally attached to them. Ahavti et Adoni et ishti et banai. Lo etzechav, I don't want to leave. I know it's the Shemitah year and I'm allowed to leave, but I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave behind the lady and the kids. So the master shall take them before God, particularly that means before Bet Din. Elohim means God, but it also means the court. He shall be brought to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl. He shall then remain his master's slave for life. V'avado liolam. But this is the source from which we learn in Torah, Parshat Mishpatim, Perek Aleph, that a baby born to a Jewish man with a non-Jewish woman, so that is not his child. Hence, because Tamar was born from Ma'acha, the Yafat Torah, the beautiful wife taken during wartime, we've learned about that, and David impregnated her during the one time he was allowed one physical intercourse with her, and then not allowed any more unless he marries her, and we learned about that. The baby, Tamar, the girl, came from that, thus David's not the father, whereas following the halacha, the Ishet Yafat Torah, the beautiful wife, Ma'acha, subsequently, according to what we learned in the Torah, converts to Judaism, and David then has the son Avshalom with her. And then David is the father, and that goes back to where all this comes from. Okay. So we learned all of that. And then there was one more thing. The idea of Kitet say, well, let's not go farther in that, and let's instead go on with what we were learning. Okay, let's just not take too much time on review. And again, remembering that David has all these sons that he is the father, each with another wife, another mother. That he had Kilav with Avigail. She was the wife of the gruff, wealthy man in the Carmel region up north. And he had that sheep shearing of his own, very wealthy. He refused to give anything to David and his men. David would have killed him. And so Abigail saved her husband Naval's life by racing food and substance to David and his men. And then it emerged that when she went back and told her husband that she saved his life by bringing all that to David from their enormous wealth, he wouldn't even notice it. But she saved his life. He had a stroke and died from the idea that any of his possessions were taken from him and given to David and his men. Not that he had anything against David per se, though he did. He was against people walking around trying to get a free meal from him. So he died, and David took Abigail as a wife. And then he had a third wife, Avshalom, the one we're talking about from the beautiful Ma'acha, the Eshet Yafat Torah, whom he took in war. She had been the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur. And he was married to Chagit. She gave him Adonia. And he had Shaphatya, who was born to Avital. And he had Yitram, who was born to Eglah. So we had all of those wives. And I skipped the first one, Amnon, who was born to Achinom. Okay. And then later he had others. We continue. So the Gemara talks about this whole greater story of David and of what was going on with him exactly, and what was going on with him having children and everything. So let's take a quick look at that. This is from Sanhedrin 21a. Mishnah, it builds off a Mishnah, and the Mishnah says that the king shall not have many wives, shall not add many wives for himself. This is from the same chapter 17, where we learn that the king is not supposed to bring everybody down to Egypt. As you recall, it's not to return to Egypt, and they're not supposed to try to get the horses from Egypt in order laharbot sus, to maximize the amount of horses that they get, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we learned all of that already. And the king's not supposed to have too many wives, so that they should not turn his heart away from reverence for God. Because you start marrying people like Ma'acha, who actually is a non-Jew, the daughter, princess from another king, and she doesn't have hashkafa, the sort of the Jewish Torah orientation. And you start marrying women from all over the place simply because they capture your fancy. And the next thing you know, you're surrounded by people who don't have that religious fervor that you started with. And so even if he wants to marry only one such wife, who will turn him away? If she turns his heart away, he should not marry her. And so it goes like this. And it's even, he says, even someone righteous like Abigail, who brought food and charity to save her own husband, not to mention him, as righteous as she was, if she would already be too many, if he would already have too many, then at some point he shouldn't even be marrying someone like her. Okay. So it got into that story, and it gets into how much is too many. And the Gemara learns out, interestingly, that too many, according to most opinions, is 18 for a king. And there are other opinions, and they learn it out this way. It starts with the Torah having said, as I read you, that he was married to 6 wives, and he had those kids. And then afterwards, incident of Bathsheba, in which God sends the prophet Nathan, to tell David he has sinned and he's going to be punished, and God has sent Nathan to tell it to him. You will recall Nathan initially had presented to him a metaphor. Imagine there's a rich man and he's traveling and he finds a poor man who has only 1 sheep, and the rich man ends up, and the traveler ends up going to the rich man's house, and he's got a zillion sheep, plural. And the wealthy host, who now is hosting the visitor, decides to make dinner for the visitor, and rather than taking one of his own sheep from his multitude of sheep, he takes that 1 sheep from the poor guy and kills it and makes a meal out of that. And that's that metaphor kind of referring to how David has all the wives he needs and can have plenty more. And instead, he takes advantage and takes this wife from this one guy, Uriah the Hittite. And David says the guy deserves a death penalty for taking such a sheep, or for all the more so taking a wife. And Nathan says, you're the one. You're the one who did it. And here's the wording. Here's how they learn out that a king could have 18 wives. It says, Kol Amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Anochi Meshachticha L'melech Yisrael, V'anochi Hitzalticha Miyad Shaul. So we learned this already, but now I'm teaching it in a different context. That Nathan says, God sent me to tell you, I anointed you to be the king of Israel. I've been there at your side. I've saved you in every way. I give you anything you want. I've given you the house of your master. Your master was Saul, King Shaul. I've given you his palace. I've given you, well, his palace was, let's say, in tribe of Benjamin, and now you're in Hebron and then Jerusalem. But I've given you the house of Saul, the kingdom, and I've given you his wives to the degree that you've had his wives. Vetnalachat Beit Yisrael Yehuda, and I've given you the house of the rest of the country, the house of Israel. That's 11 tribes. Yisrael refers to all tribes except for Judea, and then there's Yehuda. V'im ma'at, and if that's not enough for you, if that were not enough, God is saying, I'd give you osif alacha kahena. I'd give you that much again. So the Gemara is going to learn he has 6 wives, and Shmuel is saying, if that's not enough, I'd give you kahena. I'd give you that again. So how many wives did he have? 6. And if you want, God says, I'd give it to you again. Gemara says that would be 12. So that means a king could have 12 wives. V'chahena. And yet again. And the Gemara gets into an interesting discussion. What does that mean? And I give you that again. One rabbi says it refers to 6. I gave you 6 wives. I would give you kahena. I'd give you that again. Another 6. V'chahena. And that again. Yet another 6. 6 and 6 and 6 is 18. And that's where we learn that a king of Israel may have 18 wives. And then there's a second opinion. He had 6 wives, and I would give you kahena. I'd give you like that again. So that's 6 and 6 is 12. V'chahena, and like that again, like the 12. So you'd have 24. So the Gemara debates, a king of Israel may have either 12 or 24 wives, and that's the source. The prophet Natan said to King David, I gave you your master's house, your master's wives, and I gave you the house of Israel and Yehudah, and if that were too little, then I'd add to you like these and like those. Like these, this is referring to the wives enumerated above, meaning another 6. And like those, this referring to another 6. So that altogether there are 18 he'd be permitted to marry. But Ravina objects to this, saying, like these, this is referring to an additional 6, like the wives enumerated above, totaling 12. And like those, this is referring to all of those enumerated previously, totaling 24. So a king of Israel may have 12 or 24, but as you see, sometimes too much. And first of all, you don't really have, how much of a relationship do you have with any of your wives? So the assumption is that a wife is there for a different purpose in those days. It's not the same level of companionship once you're at 18 and 24. It's just not enough time. Like just 24-hour day. So even if you had nothing to do as a king all day, but just to have lunch with each wife, not to imagine how much weight you would put on, it's just not practical. So you have no relationship with them. They're basically having children. They're raising children, rearing children, actually is more appropriate. And you're a father in name only, but you really barely have time with any of your children. Each one gets a hug. And maybe you have a favorite, your oldest, because that's going to become the new king someday. And there's even another opinion that it could even be 48, and we're not going to get into all of that. It does stop at 48, but at 48 is too much. And then it gets into a discussion about what's the deal in Eglah and who's Michal, and we're going to skip some of that because it takes time, and I've actually learned some of it with you in the past. Okay, but what we do know is that he gets at least 18 wives. And that doesn't count against the concubines, the Pilak Shot, the Pilak Shim. So the Gemara challenges that David had only 18 or 24. Because doesn't it say, and David took more concubines and wives in Yerushalayim after it came from Hebron? 2 Samuel 5:13. So let's take a quick peek at 2 Samuel 5:13. Can we find it quickly? Sure we can. So what it says is when he moved from Hebron to Yerushalayim, he had started 7 years in Hebron, or 7.5 years. If you remember that Gemara, we learned that he was smitten with leprosy for 6 months, but the leprosy came later. It was like a whole thing we learned at the time. And we refresh our memories that among the ways he was punished for the Bathsheba incident is that he had 6 months leprosy. But eventually, he went to Yerushalayim. David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, had exalted his kingship for the sake of his people Israel. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Yerushalayim, and more sons and daughters were born to David. So beyond the chapter 3, verse 3 in 1 Samuel, where he has 6 wives and 6 boys and a girl, he's got more than that. That's why throughout the classes, I often talk about he had more than 6 wives. Or I'll say he had more than 7 wives. And I don't give a definite number because it's not clear. And the Gemara is going to tell you that there's even more than that. Because it starts telling you, here are the names of the boys of the kids born in Yerushalayim. Shamua, Shovav, Natan, Solomon. He named one of his sons the same name as the Navi who came to give him Musar and instruct him in behavior and pass along bad news as well as good news. He named one of his sons the same name as that prophet. So you had at least 6, and 4 is 10. And then there's Yivchar and Elishua, Nefeg and Yafia, it's 14. Elishama, Eliada, Eliphalet. And it doesn't really tell us which are sons and which are children of concubines. And I guess the children of concubines, if they're Jewish, so we know who their mothers are, and he would be the father of those. If they're not Jewish, he would not be. So I was about to be casual and say, it's a whole big mess. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Based on my contemporary culture and societal experience, I don't know how it works to have 20 kids. Let's say you're rich enough that you live in Hearst Castle, and so you don't have a problem of having a dining room table that can handle 20 kids and 20 wives, and you can put 50 people at the Shabbos table. And of course, you have cooks for the palace. But I mean, it's just a different way to raise kids. It's like I don't like to be glib about this, but it's like raising kids in an orphanage. That's what's coming to my mind. That you have all these kids, and if they're happy, if it's a good orphanage, if there's such a thing, and if the kids are happy, they grow up playing with other kids. And that's the trade-off. That if you don't have that intimacy with parents, so you have a relationship with kids. Likewise, in these kibbutzim, these socialist kibbutzim, where they put all the kids in the children's house, and the parents barely spend any time with their own kids as the kids grow up. And instead, they grow up. Were you happy growing up without your parents? That you did not sleep at night in a bedroom with your parents? That they put you together, a bunch of Marxist socialists, the way the Israeli kibbutzim work, and they just put you in a big kids' hall? And kids would say, I had a wonderful childhood. We got to be with all the other kids, so we got to play, and we loved it. Okay, whatever. If that's the world you know, then that's the world you learn to love. Okay. So the Gemara, in filling out this piece of the David puzzle, so what does it mean he married wives and concubines? And I've taught you this before, but how did I know? From this Gemara. First time I have a chance to really show you in the Gemara. Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, it's a halacha you always have to quote whoever taught you. We learned that from Megillah that we just read 2 weeks ago. When Esther tells King Achashverosh there's a plot, Bigtan and Teresh plan to assassinate you, and I found out from Mordechai the Jew, whom Achashverosh does not yet know is related to Esther. He knows the Jew, Mordechai is outside the gates of the palace all the time, and she's saying, Mordechai the Jew passed word to me, king does not yet know that Esther's Jewish. That will only be revealed at the second wine party, which prompts him to go crazy when she says, this man, this evil man, Haman, is going to wipe out our people, etc., etc. But Rav Yehuda says, the Rav says, following this Jewish halacha ever since then, because Esther had told Achashverosh that Mordechai the Jew was the source of the tip on the assassination, therefore in chapter 5, when the king one night cannot fall asleep and asks his people to read him from his chronicles, and they start reading from all the volumes, they happen to pick the volume and a page that talks about recounting the assassination that almost happened, it says in the book that they were alerted to the assassination plot by Mordechai the Jew. Then the king says, did we ever give the guy a reward? They say, no, we never rewarded him. King says, well, we've got to give him something. Haman shows up. What should I give him? Put him on your horse and you go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. From this, we learn the power of citing your source. So whenever a rabbi teaches something in the Gemara, or the Mishnah, or even if I cite something that I've learned from someone else, I'll say that I had this very interesting insight that I learned from Rabbi Avigdor Miller or some other rabbi. Why do I cite them? First of all, it's the right thing to do. Otherwise, it sort of borders on plagiarism. And beyond that, it's a halacha. Anyway, Rav Yehuda cites Rav. Wives, difference between a wife and a concubine, wives receive a marriage contract, a ketubah. Betrothal, kedushin. Kedushin, nisuin, kedushin v'nisuin. And concubines are taken without a marriage and without betrothal. You just sleep with them. And they can move in with you and be your live-in sleeping partner, or they stay wherever they live in their own home or their hovel, and you go visit them when the mood inspires you to do so, to sleep with her, and then you go on your way. And we've talked about, why would a woman ever agree to that? It would be women who have no choice, who come to a perception that no one's going to marry me. And this way, I have no guarantees if he ever dumps me, but in the meantime, he's providing for me. He doesn't have to, but he understands he's going to give me gifts. He's going to give, if I have kids, he provides for the kids, but there's no guarantee. So anyway, that's what David had going on. And David, Rav Yehuda says, the Rav says David had 400 children in his army. So here we just learned about 18 or so, but we know he had more children, who had more wives and more concubines. And there's at least a midrash. Did he have 400 children? Well, that's what it says. All of them were sons of beautiful women, taken captive from their Gentile homes during war. So in other words, Ma'acha was one of only one Yafat Torah. He went to a lot of wars. Doesn't mean that he had 400 Yefefiot Torah. Doesn't mean that he took 400 such women, but with some of those women, he had more than one child. And he was halachically not the father of any, for reasons we've learned, at least from the first intimacy. And then when each one converted, then the subsequent ones. So it's a different world. This is like I mentioned Haile Selassie, and I mentioned, you hear about these kings and these emperors. I'm even thinking, for those of you who've ever seen, and sure it's fiction and just a story, but for those of you who've ever seen The King and I, where the British house maker and first grade teacher accepts a contract to teach the king's children, and he starts, there's that song where, where he starts one by one bringing in all of his Siamese kids, and first it's one, then it's another, then it turns out he's got a lot of kids, and that's what you had. You had these emperors and kings would have lots and lots of wives, and the wives would have kids, and they it's a different world. They weren't doctors, they weren't lawyers, they weren't into IT or accounting, or even secretaries or bookkeepers. They had kids. Wasn't that the single most important thing to a mother, Rachel? That there was Leah having kids, 4 children, and later she had 2 more, Yisachar and Zvulun, and Rachel wanted a child. And she was critical at Yaakov. She said, "Why haven't you given me a child?" It was not a good moment in their marriage, where he comes back and says, "It's not my fault. If God doesn't want to give you a child, don't bother me. It's not like I'm not doing my part." And how much she gave her life to have that second child, Binyamin. And we see it again, that Yitzchak had to beg God because Rivka didn't have children for, 20 years. And Rosh Hashanah, the Haftarah, where Hannah is crying at the wall that she wants children. That was what it was to be a woman in those years. To have children, your pride was, I have 5 children, I have 10 children. And you devoted your time to rearing the children. And what happened when they moved out? Then you had grandchildren. And that was what your life was about. And nowadays, the moderns make fun of that and they mock that. Oh, she's just a housewife. Pity on her. Well, when you get to be older, my sister Rhonda, she's constantly, bli ayin hara, she's constantly emailing me with pictures and updates on her latest stories from her children and her grandchildren. And that's the focus of her life. Focus of my life, as things have unfolded in my life as being a rabbi, for 20 years being a law professor, being a writer, whatever I do. And Ellen Zichrona Livracha, focus on her life was she was manager of investigating fraud at UCLA, financial fraud, and being a Rebbitzin, and Denise, an attorney. And so many of you, I don't want to start with one because then it becomes like the Academy Awards. We have to mention everybody. But in those days, the definition and the thing you were proud of is look at how many kids I have. And they kept you busy. And it never ended because there's always grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And as I say, Rhonda, more than anyone else, has the most. And she's always got beautiful information. And Bli Ayin Hara, it shouldn't, like, it should only be, she should only have, and we say, Kain Yirbu. It's a common rabbinic expression when someone says, I just had a child, or I have two children, you respond, what's the proper response? Not Mazel Tov. The real insider response, Kain Yirbu. May you have even more. May they multiply even more. So he had 400 children, and he took a lot of these women, and really, it's not something that the rabbis encourage, and I'm saying it that way only because I'm talking about David HaMelech, and I consider who I am. Compared to David HaMelech, I have to watch myself. I can't be critical, but that's not something the rabbis recommend. And you understand what I'm trying to say. And these boys grew their hair in a Gentile hairstyle. Think of the way that the yeshivish boys in the black hat community, the Haredim, think of the Haredi look. So these boys grew up looking like, not like Haredim. These boys dressed and looked like Goyim. And that was their the father had, how much time did their father spend on them and combing their hairs and making sure they got a haircut or whatever? It was basically on their mothers to take care. If they had that many women and that many kids, and so those women, so they grew up with like incredibly long hair, let's say, and you know, who knows what, God knows what they had, Mohicans, I don't know. Every so often when you're in the street, you see somebody and you just think quietly to yourself, Rahman al-Itzlan, God forbid, a child of mine should look like that. And what, you're being judgmental? Of course I'm being judgmental. Since when is it religious Jew not judgmental? The proper thing is keep it to yourself, and you don't act against people simply because they're walking around with Mohicans or whatever they're walking around with. Treat them with equal respect. Hire them for the job if they're good for the job, but when you come home at night, you describe, you'll never believe what I saw today. God forbid my child should look like that. So they all looked like that, and they all sat in carriages of gold, and they walked at the heads of the troops, and they were the strong arm and forces of the house of David. So that's what was going on there. David's daughter, Tamar, was the daughter of a beautiful woman, taken captive in war, but she was born before the mother converted. Therefore, Tamar was not considered the daughter of David according to Halacha. And that's where all I've been teaching you comes from, not just Midrash per se, but Sanhedrin 21a, a tractate of Gemara, major Gemara, Sanhedrin, Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. Okay. So now that we see halachic sources, so Malbim gets into the meat of some of these things. In the story of, first of all, how Amnon starts becoming passionate for Tamar. Malbim talks about it. Siper, Eich nit kayamu, Yehudei ha'onshim, shehigid natan leDavid echad echad. Malbim says, it's interesting now in chapter 13 how the text starts laying out one by one the punishments that God executed against David, conforming with what the prophet Natan told him was going to befall him. Sha'achari meta yelad hayama aseshel Tamar. First, the little baby, the original baby born to Bathsheba, the one who instantly became deathly ill, such that David sat on the floor in mourning and wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink until the baby died. Then he got up and ate and drank. Next, immediately after that, we get into the story of Amnon wanting to get his hands on Tamar. The Acharav Maaseh de Avshalom. And when we finish this chapter 13 tragedy, we're going to get into what becomes of Avshalom. First, that he murdered his brother, Amnon, in avenging his sister, Tamar. And then a lot more is going to come out of Avshalom. And the rabbis even are going to tell us, remember, Avshalom is born to Maacha, the Afat Toar. And the rabbis are going to tell us, this is part of what happens, even if you fulfill the halachic requirement for taking a Afat Toar at war, this is the kind of child you're going to end up with. It's not going to be a Ben Torah, a model of a religious boy. And so it's laying it out. Here we go. Natan came with the warnings. This will happen, and that will happen, and that will happen. And here it goes. And that's what we see. That right away it starts. You see, Tamar was not literally the sister of Amnon. This is what I've taught you. And this is what I taught you. She later on, after the rape, when Amnon throws her out of the room, begs him, don't throw me out, marry me. Because Dad, a father, will not deny me, will not refuse me to you. Well, if she literally were the sister of Amnon, of course he would refuse her. You can't marry a sister. That's a Torah commandment in chapter 18 of Vayikra, Leviticus. But he won't refuse me because I'm not your sister. That's my nickname. My nickname is sis or bro. I'm not your sis because I have a different mother. I have the same mother as Avshalom, but not from you. And I have a different father, a zero father. Whereas you have David, Mavor Shlo Hayata Achoto. So she made clear she's not actually the sister. Amnon b'chol parsha kor achoti. Okay, Malbim says, yes, he constantly called her sister. Ubazu anu muchrachim al kabbalat chachmeinu zichronan levracha shemachar im Tamar hayata yafat toar uvaleh David bi arishona. And so we come away understanding that Tamar was born from a Afat Toar, from a beautiful woman taken in battle, from the first intercourse, that one permitted intercourse at war before conversion, b'milchama, v'nit abra mitamar b'nachriota, and she became pregnant and was conceived from Ma'acha ben Nachriot. Nachri means a non-Jew, a guy. Nachriota, during her guyishness, during the time that she was non-Jewish. Ubidin Torah, he muteret la'amnon, and according to Torah law, though it seems weird, she was permitted, mutar, to marry Amnon, ki bincha haba min ha'akum eino koroi bincha, because your child born to a non-Jewish mother is not called your son. And we've learned that, and that's what I've taught you already. Okay. Rock. Avshalom shenolad achar shenetgaira karoi ben David. Only Avshalom, who's born after she converted. And many of these say the same thing. So I'm not going to read them thoroughly because they're all saying the same. Radak, another Rabbi David Chimchi, a major commentator on the Navi, says the same thing. Kamosham Ruabatenu, Sukhmanam Levracha, Vaharayak, Elohim Na'inim, etc., etc. The proof is that she said Dad would not deny our chance to marry if that's what you want, because Dad took Mom in battle, and so saying exactly the same thing. So it's an important thing to understand that if a Jewish man has a child with a non-Jewish woman before she converts, and then she converts, and the child who's born non-Jewish also converts. So she's Jewish, the child's Jewish, the child is called up to the Torah as the son of that mother, but the father is not the father, and has no yichus, has no lineage to the child. And we continue with this. Who else did we prepare here? Here we have Ralbag. That's a third major Navi commentator. And let's see what this one. Okay. So, Ki lo yasa Cain b'Yisrael, lo yasa. She said to him, please don't have intercourse with me. When she saw he's moving in on her, she had made those cakes or pancakes or whatever with her hands and was feeding him, and he was making a move, and she said, you can't do this. This is not done in Israel among Jews. And we talked about that the Jewish culture has no room for that behavior. Lo amra mishum she'ein ro'oi l'shkav im achoto mishum gilui erva. When she said, you can't have intercourse with me, it wasn't because, and she said, because you can't do that in Israel, it wasn't because that would be incest between a brother and a sister. Rather, it's because you don't do that. She'im hayazeh Cain, eich yodelo hamelech. How could it be later that the king would have perhaps allowed them to marry? Ach amra shelo ya'asa Cain b'Yisrael avo al isha derech znut. Rather, Jews who are observant do not have prostitution. You'll tell me there's a case here and there you've heard of. First of all, in the modern era, there's so much breakdown. Unfortunately, even in Orthodoxy right now, there's like a big scandal, and so many of us Orthodox rabbis are furious. There was news 2 days ago that Yeshiva University agreed to have an LGBTQ club, to have students who demanded an LGBT. They were called Gay Pride at Yeshiva University, or Gay Pride at YU. And we, the alumni, were outrageous. And YU, we were so proud. YU refused. And YU went to court. You will not have a Gay Pride at YU group. And we wrote about it. I'm a writer. I write in several outlets, and many of us wrote about it with great pride. That we are teaching a lesson to the American people that even if everyone else is capsizing and collapsing, Orthodox Jews will not allow our religion to be hijacked by the latest woke stuff. You can't beat up LGBTQs. You have to treat them nicely. We're not even saying expel them. Don't ask, don't tell. It doesn't matter. Nobody's asking. No one wants to know. And if someone beats up a gay kid on campus, maybe that kid should be expelled. So but to have a gay students group at impossible. We were so proud. And went to court, and we live in a corrupt world, a morally corrupt world. So it was in state court, and the state trial court ruled that YU has to have the gay club. And what are you going to do? They'll lose all this access to money. You see with Columbia what happens when the spigot gets turned off. So what YU did was they were so determined not to have a homosexual club that they announced they're canceling all clubs on campus. Every single club that exists on the college, all extracurricular utilities, all extracurricular activities are canceled throughout the entire university to take away the argument that the university has clubs but won't recognize them. And then suddenly from out of nowhere, and it's been on appeal, then it got to the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court. And for those of us who practice law and know this stuff, we weren't surprised. The US Supreme Court said, we cannot take the case yet. You've only been decided at trial level in the state court. You have to first appeal to the state court appellate level. And if you lose, you have to bring it to the state court, Supreme Court of the state. And then if you're not happy, then you can come back to us and hope that we'll take the case with the understanding, wink, wink, we will take the case then. And it's one of the weird things of the way the legal system works, that you have to what they call exhaust. You have to exhaust your remedies. And it wastes a lot of, this is what's going on now, whether you're for Trump or anti-Trump. This is what's going on. There are all these things, Trump's executive orders, and they've got all these Obama judges and Biden judges to which his opponents run, and they issue national injunctions to stop Trump. And really what ought to happen is all these things ought to be up in front of the Supreme Court now, and just get to the end of it. Let the Supreme Court say, we agree with the Obama judge on this, we disagree with that Obama judge, we agree with that Obama judge, we disagree with that. And then you'll know finally instead it's going to take a year of bringing all these cases up to the appellate level, the circuit courts. And that takes a year until they decide, because you have to write and file your briefs and you get on the calendar, and then the judges have to study it, and then you have your hearing, and then the judges decide, and they write. And then you go to the Supreme Court, and so it'll take like 2 years or a year and a half, and it'll be decided. And that's how the system works, like it or not. I frankly, and most of us don't like it. Get to the bottom line. So Yeshiva University now is in the middle of the state court system, and from out of nowhere, they suddenly announced this week that they're going to recognize the club, and they've got all these, it's not really, first of all, they have to change their name. They can't be called Gay Pride Club. They have to be called Hareini. That's the name. I don't want to get into what that's like a neutral name. And it's not really a gay pride club. It's a club that's going to take care of the needs of gay students. But all the headlines in all the newspapers, Yeshiva University recognized a gay club. And all the members of this gay club, all 20 of them or so, are on social media. Yeshiva University recognized our gay club. Yeah, but they were so smart at Yeshiva University, you're going to have to change the name. You can't be called Gay Pride at YU. You have to be called Hareini. But all the social media, they recognized our gay club. And I'm getting emails from people, what's with the gay club? And now Haftar, Hebrew Academy of 5 Towns and Rockaways, Yeshiva, Orthodox Yeshiva High School. A kid just went on social media yesterday, said, now that Yeshiva University recognized the gay club, we are forming a gay club at Haftar Yeshiva. And it's just disgusting. And it's this parsha, this is not over yet, but it's what happens when people are weak and they don't stand. They're not strong. They're weak. Nebuch, that we have to wait for the Southern Baptists and the Vatican to take a stand and stand on certain things. So I got into this because Rabbag is saying, when Tamar was saying to Amnon, don't sexually assault me. Lo ye'osekain b'Yisrael, this is not done among the Jews. Rabbag is going another step. He's saying, you might think from the text, she's saying, we don't have incest, not Jews. Maybe the ancient Egyptians in the 10 Commandments, where Ramses with the girlfriend and sister Nefertiri, but we don't do that. What you're finding here is Rabbag is saying she knew she's not halachically the sister, and it would not be incest of brother with sister, but it would be rape. It would be sexual immorality. And I was saying, nowadays, Nebuch, what people find in all the society, but even so, Jews, Orthodox Jews, even if you'll find an outlier case, the fact is, who thinks of Orthodox Jews as rapists? Honestly, there's a terrible stereotype for another day and another time about Jews with money, and no one's proud of it. And it's worth a much longer discussion, which we don't have time for now. But Jews are not associated with rape. That's why, like a Jeffrey Epstein, first of all, he's certainly no religious Jew. Certainly was no Ben Torah. And he did not hang around with religious Jews. He hung around with Bill Clinton and the guy from the British family. He didn't hang around with religious Jews. Even Bugsy Siegel, from what we learned the other day, was better. Jews are not associated with rape. I don't want to say whether blacks are associated with rape or whether Hispanics are associated with rape or South American immigrants are associated with rape. I don't want to get into that. But certainly not Jews. So that's what she meant. This is not done in this. It's part of our pride. We are not associated with rape. And we are shamed beyond words when there's a Bernie Madoff or any of these things. You know it. You know how much we are ashamed and humiliated when we hear this. Did you hear somebody was, and then you find, the first thing is, what's his name? I hope his name isn't Jewish. I remember my Zaidi, Zichron Lavracha, when John Kennedy was assassinated. My Zaidi told me, I was 10 years old, Beryl, I just hope it wasn't a Jew. And that never occurred in my 10-year-old mind. It didn't even occur to me that it would be good or bad. I was still trying to process that the president was killed. And he was so comforted, Zaidi, when he heard that the name was Lee Harvey Oswald. And then the next day, Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And Zaidi, Zaidi just, when they found out his signature, Jack Ruby, well, he says to me, a Jew is not Ruby. Ruby is not a Jew. A Jew is gold. A Jew is silver. A Jew is diamond. There's no rubies. And then it turned out Ruby he had changed his name from Rubenstein. Oh, my Zaidi. But so you know what I'm talking about. And this is very important to us. We were taught this in yeshiva, elementary school. Don't bring embarrassment to the Jewish people. I'm 7 years old. We were all told that when you go on the city bus to go home, which we were allowed to do in 6th grade at age 11, don't bring a chil Hashem. Don't bring shame to the Jewish people. That a bunch of boys will be on a city bus acting unruly, and that we're going to start having non-Jews thinking that children from a yeshiva, and you know what I'm talking about. It's a chil Hashem, by the way, the Haredim that won't serve in the Israeli army. The shame that brings to Torah, that secularists, their boys and girls are serving. The idea that my son and daughter are serving and your son and daughter don't serve, and on top of it, I have to pay taxes because you don't work and you're getting government handout. It's a chil Hashem, like crazy a chil Hashem. And there's the beginnings of a movement among the Haredim to serve and to contribute. So this is a very big thing, and it's a very important mindset among Jews. The idea of chil Hashem, and the idea that you're not supposed to tag and label people and have stereotypes. Well, we do have stereotypes, and we're proud of them. And we don't rape, and we don't have that. And so she's saying we don't rape, and that was what Shimon and Levi was saying to Yaakov at the time of the rape of their sister Dinah in Shechem. Lo ya'asa kain b'Yisrael. Such things are not done among Jews. V'lo yaderech yishut u'mizeyit ba'er shelo hayata Tamar achoto al derech ha'emet v'lazeh amru Rabbeinu Zachranu Livracha sheTamar hayata bat yafat. And then they get into the other thing. Well, on top of it, she wasn't actually a sister anyway. So on top of it, it wouldn't have been brother-sister incest. So it's both ways. Hine lo hayata habat bat David ki ena ben habal Yisrael min hashifcha karoi ben Yisrael. She wasn't the son of David because a child born to a non-Jewish woman, the husband, the father is not halachically the father. And we've gone through this and we don't have to continue. Let's continue here. So we have Malbim on Vayitzer Amnon and Tamar. Let's see what he's saying. So, Mefresh shelo hayatalo tikva lisa'ota liisha ba'avur Tamar achoto ki hayata gadla kivat ben habanim. So what ended up happening? We learned. What ended up happening is that Amnon felt he was distraught. He'll never be able to marry Tamar. He wanted sex with Tamar. Let's call it what it is. And we said it made him sick. She was a virgin. Why did it bother him that she's a virgin? Well, you put one and one together. I actually use the word sex, S-E-X. I've told you many times the Torah, the Tanakh speaks in very elegant language. Not that the word sex is a dirty word, but it's not an elegant word. There's a word for in Hebrew for sex would be minut. Mem yud nun vav taf. Min. Mem yud nun means sex, like the male sex and the female sex, like gender, is the min. Min zachar is the male sex. Min nekeva is the female sex. So minut is sexual activity. There are other words for it, just as there are in English. And the Torah and the Tanakh speaks in such elegance, it bothered him that she was a virgin. So what's this? So she's a virgin. What's it your business? It's his business because he doesn't want her to be a virgin anymore because he wants to end her virginity. And it seemed impossible to do anything to her. So that's what Malbim is commenting on. We've already learned he could have married her because they had different mothers and father. But Malbim is saying not so simple. Shelo hayalo tikva li sota. He felt I have no hope. Right? The word tikva, hatikva, is the hope. I have no hope ever to be married to her, li'isha, for her to be my wife, but avor Tamar achuto, because she's my sister. Ki hoyata godla kir vat bein habanim. She was reared in the household like a sister among brothers. Shema shenitabra b'melchama, because even though she was from a mother impregnated at wartime, and therefore technically the father was not her father, lo hishpil kavoda be'enei Beit David. Her dignity and honor did not rank her any less in the house of David. They all regarded her as a princess of equal Davidic standing. Lishalot yanechshevet kebito. Even though she was not to be considered his daughter, hagam she'al din Torah he can. Nevertheless, it was like she was, v'yada, shelo titrat sehi, and he knew that in light of her standing as a sister among brothers, she would not agree in the first instance to marry her. If he's simply out of passion, needing to have sex with her, would have asked her, technically, we're allowed to be matched. May I marry you? He felt she'll say no. Are you crazy? I'm your sister. And he felt if he would try to explain the technical legalities, he would get nowhere. It was only after he raped her that she then, contemplating the new circumstances, and perhaps she will never be able to marry, and her status will be as a raped, debased woman. Now she's suddenly begging him to marry, but he didn't anticipate the circumstances would be that. Amnon But at the outset, in Amnon's mind, he was thinking, she'll never do it. It would be like making her some woman I picked up in the marketplace, that I picked up off the street, who's not from the household of David. Furthermore, virgins in those days were much more modest than today. Today, a virgin goes out in the marketplace, gets a job, goes to work, mixes with people, not immorally, very modestly, perhaps dresses modestly, speaks modestly, acts modestly. But in those days, a virgin did not consort with men in the marketplace. In the Haredi community, for example, let's just move this forward. And we're winding down now. we're winding down. We've got half of the commentary done. We'll do the other half next week. In the Haredi community, historically, they don't want their daughters going out to be secretaries in offices, in businesses, or bookkeepers. Not only would they be everything you would expect the Haredim would expect of their virgin daughters, but you might think, well, it'd be a secretary, not in a general office. They should either be teachers at girls' schools or teachers in kindergartens and nurseries, or secretaries and bookkeepers at all girls' schools where there are all girls faculty, or therapists, psychologists. They would get permission from a rabbi to attend perhaps an all girls degree granting program to get the therapist degree, and then they would be allowed to have only female patients, and so on and so forth, or just be full-time housekeepers and mothers, or be chefs and cooks, or any of these other things, but not to be secretaries at an office where there are women, not a virgin. They might allow a married woman on grounds that she's got a husband and the husband is keeping an eye on things. She's not going to fool around if she has a husband. But so that's what's going on here. As we go into the remainder of the commentary for next week, and the question arises, if I've taught you he could have married her, and if it turns out she wants him to have married her, so why didn't he just marry her? And clearly we see it wasn't that he was afraid he's cutting off the opportunity to have a different lady in the future that he's going to like more, because we know from his father that his father has at least 18 wives plus consorts, concubines. But it's rather he just felt they'll never let me marry her because of her status. She won't allow it. She won't let degrade herself. My brothers won't let me. My father won't let me. And so he just goes crazy. And he pays the price. And David pays the price. Now he's got a son who's dead. He's got a daughter who's raped. And he's got another son who's a murderer. And it's all in one chapter. See you, God willing, on Thursday. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye. And thanks for being with us.